Now, I'm not advocating killing swans. Killing a swan is illegal, but it is not treason. Hello, I'm Euan Roger, and today I'm going to be answering the internet's most searched questions on treason. Is treason still a crime? Yes, the medieval law of high treason is still on the statute books today, although it's not been used in the last 70 or so years. When was treason introduced, and when did treason become a crime? Treason goes back a long, long way. Ideas of betrayal, of betraying your monarch, betraying those you owe your allegiance to, goes back a long, long way. But it was first defined for the first time in law in 1352 under the reign of Edward III. And Edward brought this as a means of ensuring a new social contract between the crown and the leading nobles of the country. Because in previous years, under Edward I and Edward II, factionalism and charges of treason without much justification have been brought against people. And the power of treason is that it's not just your life that you forfeit by becoming a traitor, but it's your lands, your titles, your children's inheritance. And for the nobles of the 14th century, that was an important line in the sand that needed to be redrawn by Edward III. And that law has changed, adapted, expanded, shrunk over the years, but the heart of that legislation remains in law today. How is treason defined? So the definition of treason has changed over the hundreds of years since it was brought into law, but today it's defined in 5 key clauses. The first of these is compassing or imagining the death of the monarch or leading members in the royal family. The second is violating the Queen Consort or other leading royal females. The third is levying war. The fourth is adhering to the king's enemies. And the fifth is plotting to murder the Chancellor, the Treasurer, or leading royal justices while they're in their places of work doing their business. When was the last case of treason in the UK? So the last case of treason in the UK was brought in the aftermath of the Second World War against William Joyce, also known as Lord Haw-Haw. So Joyce worked with the Nazis to do propaganda on the radio and to try and incite English subjects. And he was put on trial for treason after the war. The problem was, Joyce wasn't British, he was actually American, Irish American. And so the case rested on whether he'd fraudulently claimed a passport and thus owed the King of England, the King of the United Kingdom, his allegiance. Joyce was found guilty and was the last person to be executed for high treason in the UK. How is treason punished? Well, today the maximum punishment for treason would be life imprisonment. But in the past, in medieval and early modern times, the punishment could be far more bloody. The traditional form of punishment for a traitor was to be drawn to the place of execution, where you'd be hanged until you're nearly dead. And then you'd be possibly disemboweled, possibly castrated, and executed. And your body would be cut into 4 pieces, often sent to areas of the country where your treasons had arisen. If you're a woman, however, you'd be burned to death for treason. Can treason be pardoned? So the simple answer to this question is yes. And throughout history, we see hundreds of cases where people have been pardoned of their treasons and can go on to lead normal lives. But often the power to pardon people was often used by the crown and the state in order to keep people in check. One example from Henry VI's reign is a man called Thomas Carver, who was found guilty of treasonous words against the king and sentenced to death. Carver was pardoned, but only after he'd been hanged to within an inch of his life, at which point he was given the pardon and allowed to go free. So in this case, it was a display of power followed by the power of the pardon. Is treason the same as sedition? So this is a slightly complicated question. Treason and sedition are very close companions, but they are distinct in law. So sedition is often generally described as the intent to arouse people into action against the government, the state, or just the kind of public well-being. And often treasonous cases involve sedition. Charges of both were often used to try and ensure a conviction, but legally they stand apart in law. Is killing a swan an act of treason? Simply put, no. Killing a swan is not an act of treason. Since the 12th century, the Crown has the right to claim any wild, unmarked mute swans. But in reality, they only enact their jurisdiction only part of this. Now, I'm not advocating killing swans. Killing a swan is illegal under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, but it is not treason. So is it treason to destroy money? it's not treason to destroy money. Throughout the years since 1352, when this was defined in statute for the first time, money has formed the basis of a lot of legislation around treason. But it's all to do with counterfeiting coins and bringing false coins into the country or using false coins in this country. Likewise, counterfeiting the Great Seal often comes up as a source of treason. But it's not a form of treason to deface a banknote. Those were the internet's most burning questions about the history of treason. If you want to find out more about the history of treason, you can come to our exhibition at the National Archives, which runs until the 6th of April 2023. And you can also buy our book, A History of Treason, in all good booksellers and the National Archives shop.